In this lecture, we'll implement parallax scrolling in our game. Parallax scrolling is a technique where the game scene is broken into two or more visual layers, with the foreground layers scrolling faster than the background layers, creating an illusion of depth in our 2D scene. It is a common technique used in many 2D platformer games. Our objectives will be to set up the import settings on the background elements, create the background scene, organize the hierarchy, and apply the proper layer and sorting layer options to our background. So let's start by preparing our background elements. So in the art folder, we actually have a background subfolder. And within that, we've got a clouds asset and a mountains asset. So let's go ahead and start with the mountains asset. We need to set the import settings, set these up properly. So the texture type should be sprite, of course. The sprite mode should be single, as we've seen before. If you look at this image, it's actually 112 pixels by 40 pixels. So if we divide 112 by 16 pixels, we get 7 units. I'll leave the pixels per unit as 16, or if it's not that for you, go ahead and change that. So the mountains are going to be a bigger sprite. They're going to span, horizontally across 7 units in our Unity space. The pivot we'll leave at center. We want to turn off generate bitmaps and set filter mode to point or no filter, as we've done in the past. And of course, set the format to true color. And if you made changes, go ahead and apply those changes. Moving on to the clouds. The clouds are a little more complicated. We've got, of course, a sprite texture type, but the sprite mode is like Sparty. It should be set to multiple because this is actually a sprite sheet. It's not a single cloud. There's actually 4 clouds defined within this one image. So you can sort of see down here in the preview, it's a little hard to see because you're seeing the sort of checkerboard pattern of the transparency. But you can see it's a 64 pixel by 16 pixel image. There's actually 4 clouds, so 4 times 16 is 64. So we want to set the sprite mode to multiple. We want to set pixels per inch to 16 once again. Then if you go ahead and click on the sprite editor, you'll actually see in the sprite editor the various sprites that make up the cloud. So there's 4, like I said. You can name these if you want. Right now it says cloud _0, _1, _2, and _3, which is fine for my purposes. Of course, the slice mode is set to automatic. Unity automatically, defined the slices for me. If it didn't do that properly, we could always go ahead and change the type to something like grid by cell size or grid by cell count, and then slice this the way we'd want to slice it. But everything is sliced fine for me. If you made any changes, you could apply those. I didn't make any changes, so it's all good. So I'll switch back to the scene view. So given that the clouds, were multiple sprites, if I open this, you're actually going to see multiple sprites here. So I want to drag out each of these clouds separately. If I drag out the overall asset, it's actually going to make an animation that cycles through these different clouds, which is not the effect that I want. I just want to use each of these individually. It's not an actual animation. So let me go ahead and drag out a few of the clouds. I'll zoom out here a little bit. And, I won't spend too much time making this look great. I'm just going to throw in some clouds just to give kind of the effect of clouds in my environment. So I've got 4 clouds out there. Of course, I could bring more out. I also want to bring out some mountains. So once again, the mountain is just a single sprite. So I can drag either the top level asset or the sprite itself. I'm going to go ahead and put my mountain roughly centered here. I could use vertex snapping to snap the bottom of this, right to the ground. So it starts at the same level as the ground and goes up. Right now it's in front of everything. We're going to change that here in a moment. And let me go ahead and duplicate to make another one. And I'll snap it to the side here. And of course, duplicate again, and then snap it to the other side. So I've got kind of a mountain range that spans all the way across with some extra on each side. So now that we're getting some of these background elements in place, let's go ahead and organize a little bit. So I'm going to create a empty game object in my hierarchy. So I'll go ahead and choose create and create empty and rename this background just to keep all of these background elements organized. Of course, I can click on one and then shift click to select all those cloud elements and drag them down into background. I could also just search the hierarchy, for example, mountain, I've got 3 of them. I can select all and then cancel the search, and those will stay selected, and then drag those into the background as we've done before. So all of my background elements are now inside of the background game object, just to keep them organized in the hierarchy. So I also need to set up the sorting layer and just the layering of these elements. So they're all going to be the same at present. So now that they're all in that background game object, I can simply select across all of them and then define the layering properties all at the same time. So the first thing that I want to do is set the sorting layer, because obviously right now they're on the default layer, which is of course above that middle ground layer, so we can't see the platforms and the ground elements and so forth. So we're going to set the sorting layer as background. We set up this earlier in the project, so we'll go ahead and choose background, and you can see immediately the mountains moved behind the ground there. We also want to put these on the background layer. So we also created a background layer in the past. Once again, the layer will be used for culling things out, for physics collisions, for camera operations, and things like that. So we'll choose background. So now that we have our background elements in place, I want to make a little visual modification. So if I just select the mountain game objects, of course they're all set up the same. They're this sort of grayscale look, which I think clashes a little bit with the rest of the look of my game. But since they're grayscale, it's easy to apply a tint to these. So we looked at this very early on in the project, but we didn't actually use it. So let's go ahead and use that now. So over in the sprite renderer component, we've got a color which is currently set to white. So there's really no tint on this object now. But if I click on color to bring up the color editor, I could then give it a little bit of a tint, maybe sort of a dark red. So it changes each color of the gray to a different shade of that red color, which I think just looks visually a little bit more like the rest of the graphics in the project, rather than that sort of stark gray look. So this is something that you can easily manipulate the look of your sprite elements through that color property. I'll go ahead and close that. So of course we could take additional time creating additional background ground pieces. For example, all those ground elements, we can use the ground elements, as background elements, maybe applying a tint color to them so they look, more distant than the foreground ground elements and platforms and all those types of things. Just realize for optimization purposes that, in the prefabs folder where we actually, set up these guys, the dirt elements, we did apply a box collider on these. If they're in the background, we're not going to be doing collisions with them. So you may want to create a different prefab or, different game objects based on the original art assets that don't have the box collider, so Unity doesn't have to calculate and worry about them. The other thing you could do is under Edit, Project Settings, Physics 2D, you could turn off all collisions with the background layer. So I could just simply go through and turn off all of these collisions between the background layer and every other layer. So if you were having, maybe physics collisions between various elements on the background layer within themselves, you would maybe leave this one checked. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave these all off.